Are you looking to spice up your next commander deck? Because we got 5 unique commander deck ideas right now.
I'm Mia, and I like stuffed crust pizza.
I'm BZ, and I want to believe. That makes us the Nitpicking Nerds. We have Dragon Shield. Links in the description, and I couldn't have said it more clearly. There's an EU and a US link, and when you use those links to buy sleeves, the best sleeves in the multiverse,
Good sleeves.
you are supporting the channel and yourself because you get awesome sleeves.
We're also sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc. because we're doing these out of order. If you use the code
Nerds
at checkout, you can save 5% of your real life paycheck dollars to save on your entire order.
Then that's crystal clear as far as I'm concerned. We are sponsored by Moxfield. There'll be an ad somewhere in between all these amazing, unique deck ideas, but you're not going to be able to guess where it is. Feel free to try. You will fail. And happy birthday to everyone whose birthday is today.
Today we're going to be going over some strategies that aren't as well played, some win cons that are a little bit wacky, or just things you might not have thought of. The first one we're actually going to be talking about is my deck, my Ramos Dragon Engine deck, which the secret commander is Door to Nothingness. Ramos is a 6-mana 4/4 that says, whenever you cast a spell, you put a 1/1 counter on it for each of that spell's colors, and you can remove 5 +1/+1 counters on it and add double Wooburg once per turn. So we're going to try and put a lot of counters on him and sneak out the Door to Nothingness and hit people with it. You can either get the door back by bringing it back from the graveyard and playing again, or copying the trigger to hit multiple players.
Yeah, so your win con is Door to Nothingness. If you wanted unique decks, you got it. Door to Nothingness costs double Wooburg to sacrifice and activate to make target player lose the game. That's what Ramos makes. So we're going to pack a bunch of multicolored spells to put counters on them so that we can remove them and not have to pay 10 mana to activate Door to Nothingness, because we already have to do it 3 times to win the game.
It's a tough win con, but it is very satisfying when you can just point at someone and go, okay, you lose.
You lose. Throw them through the door.
One of the best cards in this deck is Amulet of Vigor, which has spiked a bit in price lately due to Modern, but Amulet of Vigor says that if a permanent is going to come in tapped under your control, it actually comes in untapped. That way you can use the door immediately, and there's a couple other artifacts in here that might come in tapped that you can just use immediately also.
Yeah, usually there's like a whole turn that you just have to awkwardly wait there. This is one of the ways to make sure that it comes out untapped right away, and then players go, uh-oh, they got 5 counters on Ramos. It's not going to be good for me. I also like Radiant Performer with Door to Nothingness. It copies a trigger for each thing that it could copy. So if you target yourself to lose the game and then cast Radiant Performer, it'll replicate onto your 3 opponents who will all lose the game first, because that's how that works. And then you win the game with you lose the game on the stack. I mean, if that's not the most badass thing you can do in Magic, I don't know what is.
It's super fun, but make sure no one has that double blue up, because if that gets countered, you go, okay, I lose, I guess.
Yeah, that's kind of like, yeah, don't get caught.
I think it's pretty interesting too, because Radiant Performer can be used with other cards. For instance, I do have Assassin's Trophy in here. Destroy target permanent and opponent controls. You bring in Radiant Performer and it destroys every permanent that an opponent controls, and they just have to get that many basics. So your board stays completely untouched, and their entire board is nuked, lands and all.
Definitely some wombo combo potential with just like the weirdest cards. No one is playing Radiant Performer, so no one probably knows about that. It's super weird. Rings of Brighthearth is another way to copy the trigger, copy the activation, do whatever you need to do to make sure that more people are getting doored.
You can also use Lithoform Engine for 2 mana, just like Rings of Brighthearth, but it can also copy instants or sorceries or permanents if you pay a little bit more.
Yeah, we got Belgad Recovery and Noxious Revival. Maybe you want to throw Eternal Witness in there. Just some way to get the door back, because if you use it once and you don't have one of those ways to copy the triggers, you're going to have to get it back to use it again.
But with the door costing 10 mana, and Ramos not always going to be able to stay out, because he does get to be a really chunky flyer that, commander damage is a thing. How are you going to actually pay for the door? And that way you can use Mirari's Wake and Doubling Cube to get the double mana that you need to actually activate it.
Yeah, Doubling Cube is really weird. I think it kind of works in this deck, especially with Mirari's Wake, obviously, but when you activate Ramos to make 1,000,000 mana, then you could double most of it with Doubling Cube, and then you just have infinite mana. You just do whatever you want.
Yeah, it does work really well, and I do think that because you need so many pips in this deck, because it is a 5-color mess, I guess.
Nonsense deck. You got artifacts, you got multicolored spells to put counters, you got some cards that just put counters, ways to untap artifacts that really only work with the door and some other mana rocks.
It's a convoluted deck, but because you need those pips, Mirari's Wake and Doubling Cube do work in this.
I think the deck works. And to round it all out, we got a ways to find the door. We're going to use Word of Invention, search it out instant speed, Fabricate, put it in our hand. Inventor's Fair is a colorless land that I guess we'll put in a spell slot because that's not going to fix our mana. But it does search for the door. And I also like Wargate because it's like a ramp spell. but also gets literally anything in your deck. And it's 3 colors.
Oh, from a far distance, this is like an artifact deck. But if you look closer, it's secretly a door to nothingness deck.
It's secretly nonsense. And you can win with it. This next deck we actually had the pleasure of playing against in Command Fest Orlando, which just proves that you should have been there. It's Archangel Avacyn with a few secret commanders. It's 3 white for a 4/4 flash, flying vigilance. When she enters the battlefield, creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. And whenever a non-angel you control dies, transform her at the beginning of the next upkeep. She transforms into a 6/5 that deals 3 to each other creature and each opponent. The secret commander is one of the worst Magic cards, if not the worst Magic card ever printed. It's Sorrow's Path. Now, you might not know what this does off the top of your head. That's okay. I got you. It's a land. It taps. Choose 2 target blocking creatures an opponent controls. If each of those creatures could block all creatures that the other is blocking, remove both of them from combat. Each one then blocks all creatures the other was blocking. And, to top it off, whenever Sorrow's Path becomes tapped, it deals 2 damage to you and each creature you control. Note that it does not tap for mana either, and it's a land.
I love the fact that when our friend Bolan asked us if we want to play against this, he was like, "What's the worst card in Magic?" And he goes, "Sorrow's Path."
I just fired it off, and he was like, "Yep." And I'm
That's
like,
what the deck is.
Yeah, the whole deck revolves around getting Sorrow's Path with things like Expedition Map, which can go tutor a land, put it in play, and then it's going to power up all your janky creatures. But this deck won the game we were playing with. It kind of crushed me. I was at 700 life, and I died to these cards.
Because Sorrow's Path doesn't actually tap for mana, which is really funny, you're going to have to find ways to tap it for mana, like Urborg and Yavimaya, so it's not just dead on your board.
Well, it's dead on your board because you can't tap it. You have to have, like, blocking creatures to target with the ability. So if you just make a tap for mana, now you can nuke your own creatures at will. You can just choose to take 2 damage and deal 2 to all your creatures, which everyone, of course, would love to do. And because we're going to be playing creatures like Flumph, which is an 0/4 defender with flying for 2, and whenever it's dealt damage, you and target opponent each draw a card. So now you can tap your garbage land to draw a card along with somebody else. So we're getting somewhere.
Yeah, and the fact is, one of the biggest linchpins of this is Stuffy Doll. That's actually the thing that killed Beezy.
Yep, Stuffy Doll is indestructible, and you enters and you choose a player. It's a 0/1. Whenever it's dealt damage, it deals that much damage to the chosen player, and you can tap it to deal 1 to itself. But we're going to be tapping Sorrow's Path to deal 2 to it, and thus 2 to the person we choose. And obviously, we've got other cards that are going to A, deal damage when they're dealt damage, like Boros Reckoner and Spitemayor, but B, they also survive the 2 damage from Sorrow's Path, so they can keep doing it every turn. And if they don't answer this stuff, they're going to die.
But of course, with Stuffy Doll, you're going to need to be suiting it up, just to make sure that everyone gets that damage that you need, that one person. So for it, we have Pariah, 2 and a white. All damage that we dealt to you is dealt to the enchanted creature instead. So you aim it at Stuffy Doll, and then just aim it at the player that you chose.
So now I've got Stuffy Doll, and I'm choosing player A. Players B and C can attack me freely, and player A just takes all the damage.
Yeah, so it really starts to stack up. Even though he was gaining so much life, it was still like, oh yeah, I could one-shot him. Don't worry, he's still in one-shot range at 800.
You might be wondering why. That is, of course, because of damage doublers. Let's talk about Furnace of Wrath. 1 red. If a source would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double that damage to that permanent or player instead. With Stuffy Doll, we'll just use this. Let's say we tap Sorrow's Path. It deals 2. It tries to deal 2 to Stuffy Doll. That's now doubled to 4. Stuffy Doll says, all right, I just took 4 damage. I'm going to deal 4 to the opponent that you chose when I entered. But that gets doubled to 8 damage. So now if you start stacking other damage doublers, it turns to 16, 1,000,000 damage. And there's nothing they could do, even if they're at 700 like I was.
It was really brutal. And BZ's like, oh, it's fine. Every time a creature will come in with Tristani, I'll gain 3, 5. Oh, is that, I don't know, 600? I should be fine.
I had 86 tokens, and then I cast a Benevolent Offering, and it did not help. The other thing about this is that you can go infinite with these cards. If you have a Boros Reckoner or something and you use Avacyn to make it indestructible, and you have a damage doubler, you can have Boros Reckoner deal damage to itself over and over and over, and every time it does, it doubles. And then the final ping can go for infinite at somebody, and I guess if you give it lifelink, you also gain infinite life.
That is really juicy. I want to see that in action, but watching you get hit for 1,000 was really funny.
It was cool to see Avacyn play a part in what killed me too, because he was just like, make my things indestructible. That's totally what the deck wants to do. Deal a bunch of damage to them, replicate it, have this chamber where it just explodes, and then it killed me.
It was cool. He is going to try, though, with Donna and the War Doctor, because Donna has the soul bond thing that says if the enchanted creature or the creature that she picks would be dealt damage, she deals it somewhere else instead. So I'm really excited to see how this deck evolves.
Yeah, we have the link in the description, but just know that it's not Avacyn as the commander right now. It's Donna and the War Doctor. They might be interchangeable. They're both really cool. I love this deck. Bolan, that was a good one.
But if we want to talk about decks that really shine, how could we not talk about Moxfield.com, the best place online to build a deck? It's amazing, it's wonderful, and you can see all the decks that we talk about, at least the ones that we have lists for, on there from the description.
Look, we got 5 unique deck ideas for you. Some of them are in the description, and you're going to click on them, and you're going to go, if it was a redacted website, you would click and you go, oh, this is so crusty. This doesn't look good at all. I don't even want to play Magic today. And you call your friends up and you say, hey, sorry, I was going to come to Commander Night. I know you need a 4th, but I can't come. I went to a redacted website and it made me my eyes bleed.
I'm sick now.
Yeah,
sorry.
I'm sick today. I can't. But if you use Moxfield, you say, hey, actually, I'm coming to Commander Night, and I just built a new Sorrow's Path deck.
And if you want to see it, you can see it on my Moxfield.
Yeah, they go, wow, cool. So that's the difference here. We do have another deck that's on Moxfield. It's Bladewing Deathless Tyrant. Our friend David at the convention, same one, also played this against us in a separate game. This is not the typical Bladewing deck that you would think. This is 5 red-black for a 6/6 flying haste. When it deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker for each creature card in your graveyard, you get a 2/2 black zombie knight creature token with Menace. And I always thought this card was cool, but I never really saw a way to implement it too well. But then David's like, this is my cycling deck. And this is all about cycling specifically, not necessarily like Madness. We're playing cards with cycling and cards that pay off cycling.
I think this one is super cool considering that when you see a lot of discard effects, like when I see it in BZ's Oscar, there is a ton of madness going on, and that's really cool, but cycling takes it to a whole new level. Like with Draneth's Stinger, whenever you cycle another card, it deals 1 to each opponent. You're going to be cycling left and right. Everyone's going to be getting pinged.
Yeah, it's like I don't want to call it a win condition, but it's a way to just chip in damage and add it so that now whenever you cycle a card, you're stacking up a 2/2 zombie later in the damage right now. Also, Archfiend of Ifnir, it's so good in this deck. You cycle it, you cycle anything in your entire deck, you probably find at least 20 cyclers, and then now you're one-sided board wiping your opponents.
It is rough. This is really hard to play against. Once it gets on the field, you're like, oh, okay, I see what type of game it is.
Yeah, we could back up Bladewing with other win conditions like Faith of the Devoted. Now when we're cycling, we can pay 1 and drain everybody for 2. That's an 8-point life swing overall.
Ruthless Sniper is another payoff. You could pay 1 when you cycle or discard a card to put a -1/-1 counter on target creature. And so you can do the selective board wipe too.
I like this card. It's just like it picks off the utility creatures as you go for your game plan. Street Wraith, probably my favorite creature with cycling. It's just free. It's literally just cycles for 2 life, and who cares what it does? It puts a creature in your graveyard, and it's like your deck is 1 less card.
I also love Rampaging War Mammoth in this. When you cycle it, you can destroy up to X target artifacts, and there's usually a lot of really good artifacts on the field.
Yeah, and this is going to be like a relevant spell, but the cycling is 2x red. So it's like you pay, let's say, 5 mana, destroy 2 things, but it's not really a spell in this deck. They can't use a counter spell on it. You're just cycling your card.
Plus, it counts for the creature count in the Bladewing graveyard, so you could get an extra zombie for it later.
Yeah, Shadow of the Grave. It says return to your hand all cards in your graveyard that you cycled or discarded this turn. Just start churning through everything. Get your Faith of the Devoted triggers, get your Draneth's Stinger triggers, get your Ruthless Sniper triggers, and then do it all again.
And if you have to pay before that, you could play Songs of the Damned to get a black for each creature card in your graveyard, then bring them all back with Shadow of the Grave, and then just keep cycling them.
I love Songs of the Damned. It can ramp out like Bladewing, who gets really expensive, and it's a totally fair payoff for like, oh, I cycled 18 things this game. Here's like 18 mana, time to go off with things like Abandoned Sarcophagus, Mia.
Abandoned Sarcophagus says, you can cast spells that have a cycling ability from your graveyard. If a card that has a cycling ability would be put into a graveyard from anywhere and it wasn't cycled, exile it instead. I really like this too because it does take into account the fact that you are cycling. It would really be so bad if it was like, oh, anytime it gets put into a graveyard, just exile. It's like,
and you can't cycle anymore.
But I cycled.
Yeah, so it kind of says you can pay the card's cycling cost and the mana cost to cast it and draw a card now, and that's like really good value. One of my favorite ways to close out the game, though. We got I know Blade Wing closes things out pretty well, but we got Gem Palm Polluter. It cycles for black. Let's not even worry about that mana cost. We're not casting it. When you cycle it, you can have target player lose life equal to the number of zombies on the battlefield. So you hit once or twice with Blade Wing, stack up 20, 30 zombies, and then just kill someone out of the blue.
That is going to be so good. That's just such a big chunk of life. I love the fact that there are certain cards that just like make you lose life based on how much stuff is like graveyard, like a Lolth Giant and stuff. So this is just like an even bigger, better, just like, okay, go for it. Have fun. The next one is a commander that we can take so many different ways, but this is one of my personal favorites. It's Yarok the Desecrated, but you actually use dungeons to get those triggers and get value. He's a 2 in Sultai, 3/5, Death Touch, Lifelink, so many words. If a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, it triggers an additional time. So we're going to be using it to take the initiative, venture through dungeons, and then get a bunch of free creatures and get so much value.
Yeah, just forget all of that, like, generic, boring Yarok stuff. Throw it out the window. You're not playing Grey Merchant of Asphodel. You're not playing Craterhoof Behemoth. You are venturing through the dungeon until everyone is dead. That's the win con. Like, that's what we're doing. There's a lot of venture cards. The ones that you really want, though, to start things off, to get into the Undercity, the good dungeon, are the take the initiative cards, like Arakakra Sneak, which is a 4-mana 1/4 flying, take the initiative. That puts you in the dungeon you want to be in, where all of the modes are high impact and relevant for Commander.
It is really important to make sure you start there, because going into the dungeon and initiative are different, and if you start going into one dungeon, you have to finish it before you go into the other, which gets a little bit rough.
Right. So, our editor is going to help us out here. But if we have Lost Mine of Phandelver on screen, if you play one of the old venture cards, you go into that dungeon. Now, if you take the initiative, you progress through that dungeon. That doesn't sound great, so just flip them. Play the initiative card first, go into the Undercity, now play a regular venture card, which ETBs will get doubled. That's the whole point of this Yarok thing. Venture twice into the Undercity, and now you're getting some sick value. So Underdark Explorer, Rilsa Rail, Kingpin, Feywild Caretaker, Passageway Seer, and Vicious Battle Rager, all of the cards are in the deck. They're all now venturing twice. All of these are just turboing us through the dungeon, and one of my favorite rooms in the dungeon is make somebody lose 5. We're going to have Dungeon Delver, of course, so that Yarok says that our dungeon rooms trigger an additional time, and now we're going to be making people lose 10 when we go to that dungeon.
That's really, really juicy. And the fact is, with the initiative cards, a lot of them do have extra payoffs for if you have the initiative right now, or if you've completed a dungeon. Like Risa Rael gives you extra stats, and I think
Huge
Death
stats.
Touch or something.
It gives you like First Strike, Death Touch, Menace, +5 if you've completed a dungeon. Fly. You throw it on Yarok, just start smacking face with your 3/5 flyer, and now you're venturing into the dungeon whenever you hit.
I mean, you're also gaining life too, which is really nice. And Death Touch, you could have a really good blocker if push comes to shove.
Yeah, so now that we started out, we're throwing into the Undercity, we're getting into the first few rooms, we're going to finish it off with like Displacer Beast. I don't want to go into the Lost Mines of Phandelver. I want to go back into the Undercity. So I'm going to play that after, venture twice, maybe finish the dungeon, and then that's just going to get me to the top 10 cards, which then finds me another card that ventures into the dungeon. Yarok will double it up because he's a homie, and that's how that works.
And if you want to get something from your graveyard that died a little bit earlier, we're going to be using Fate's Reversal to return a creature to our hand and also venture into the dungeon.
That creature is going to venture into the dungeon. And you see, I think this is a much cooler version of this deck than like Sephiroth. I think Sephiroth can get a little bit like, not repetitive, but time consuming, where you're just triggering a million things. And I think Radiant Solar is not a fun Magic card. That's like the dungeon card, and it makes things go a little bit too hard. I think this is a very fair version where you're just going to be going into 2, 4, 6 rooms a turn, and then if they can't kill you, they're going to start taking a bunch of damage.
Varus Silvery Moon Ranger is also going to be a great payoff. You're going to be casting creature spells a ton anyways. You're going to be venturing twice because of Yarok. This is once each turn also. So you're going to be completing dungeons, getting the wolves that you need, and then also just if you are in the Undercity one, you're going to be getting free creatures too with buffed stats.
Yeah, Eccentric Apprentice. When it enters the battlefield, venture into the dungeon twice. And at the beginning of combat, if you've completed a dungeon, up to 1 creature becomes a bird with base power 1/1. And that's really just flavor text, because guess what? It ventured into the dungeon.
And Bar the Gate, a 3-mana counterspell, but you also venture. 3-mana counterspells is not something we would usually recommend, but this is more for flavor than anything else.
Yeah, this is the flavorful deck. When you got to counter their 6-mana commander, Bar the Gate won't feel that bad. You just get a venture too. It's like, oh, if you can counter a spell and then maybe make somebody lose 5 or go to creature, then it starts to get to be worth 3 mana. So this might actually be okay in this deck. That brings us to the next deck, which is Thassa Deep Dwelling. Thassa is 3 blue for a 6/5 indestructible if your devotion is less than 5. She's not a creature. At the beginning of your end step, you flicker a creature you control, and then you can pay 3 blue to tap another target creature. This isn't just Thassa Blink value. This is Thassa Mill. We're going to be milling people out.
Yeah, you're building this right now, and it looks really interesting. It has some of my favorite cards in here from my Duality of Drawing Cards deck, and I'm really excited to see it play out.
Yeah, I'm building a budget version, so I'm not going to get, all of these bangers, but this is the non-budget spicy version. When I think mill, one of the first cards I always think of, which works very well with flickering and making more creatures enter the battlefield, is Alter the Brood. Just 1 mana. Whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent mills a card. It's like a low investment, nice early game play that could really amount to like 10 to 12 cards, which is obviously worth 1 mana.
This is going to stick around for a bit because there's always going to be a better artifact on the field that people are going to want to kill with like target removal if they have it. And later in the game it might get swept up or something, but you're still going to have like 10 cards for each opponent already in the graveyard, and that's a pretty good deal.
Usually people see this card and they think infinite combos because it is a payoff for a lot of that stuff. And you can go like a really spiky route. I'm just going to play this card by itself, but you can play it with like Zelix, the squid guy, who's like whenever they mill a creature, you make a 1/1 token. And it's like, oh, but then the token makes you mill, and if any of you mill a creature, I get a token, and then it makes you mill, and they can really just chain together for like almost infinite mill. That's another way to take this. You definitely could do that.
I mean, you have to chug through like 300 cards, basically.
Yeah, give me a chance. Just let me play Zelix, please.
We're also going to be playing Sphinx Mindbreaker. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent mills 10 cards. That's a pretty good chunk, even though it is 7 mana to bring out.
But basically, that just becomes 20 once we get Thassa. And then if you have things like Essence Flux or Teferi's Time Twist or whatever, cheap ways to flicker it, now it's like 20. But when you try to kill it, another 10. And then you're already a third of the way there.
Yeah, it's really going to add up after a while, and it actually makes it pretty viable if you can get to this point in the game.
Yes. But next is Sage's Row Denizen. Whenever another blue creature enters the battlefield under your control, target player mills 2 cards. Unfortunately, it's just target player, but this is kind of like the budget, cheap version of Alter the Brood. Whenever you're doing your game plan anyway, getting all these little creatures entering, flickering them for extra ETBs, you can mill, 6 to 8 cards a turn.
I mean, mill is one of those strategies where you gotta work for it.
You really gotta put in the work.
Because it's not easy, but boy is it rewarding when you go, oh, you want to draw and your library's empty? Cool. Awesome.
This is, to me, much more interesting than flickering a Muldrifter 6 times. I want to flicker Jace's Mindseeker. 4 blue for a 4/4. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent mills 5, and you can cast an instant or sorcery from among those without paying its mana cost. This is sweet. I think this card's cool. It has a lot of potential. I think that you can at least choose the opponent who has the most instant and sorcery, so it's not a complete whiff. There is a chance it whiffs, but that's our fallback. We just want to mill anyway.
Yeah, and you sometimes get really good stuff out of this. I wouldn't be mad to even get like a swords or something, or just something big, just like a Rise of the Dark Realms, or especially
they have those cards in there. God forbid you hit like a Breach the Multiverse. You're like, let's go again, spin the wheel.
I'm so excited.
This card's sweet. Yeah, I'm hoping that this budget mill deck comes together because these cards are just really, really cool. I also even like Overwhelmed Apprentice. It's just a dumb dork, costs 1, and it mills them for 2, and you scry 2. It's like barely worth a card. I think it's worth it in this deck because there's only so many creatures that mill on ETB, and stacking them up, even if it's just 2 at a time, probably worth the inclusion.
I mean, it's just a good turn 1 play for mill anyways.
It's basically like the Soul Ring of mill.
And for 2 mana, if you need a turn 2 play, is Manic Scribe. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent mills 3, and at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if there's 4 or more types among your graveyard, that player mills 3 cards.
This one's sweet.
Yeah, you could actually get there pretty fast if you have, a way to just get a land in there or something, or mill yourself a little bit. It might not be too bad.
I don't hate 2 mana, each opponent mills 3 on a repeatable body that you can continuously do, but then it's just like mill an extra 3 if I have Delirium, which we probably will. I like Manic Scribe a lot. I think it's like a lot better than Overwhelmed Apprentice. Let's put it that way. We also have Sphinx's Tutelage and Psychic Corrosion. We're playing blue. We're drawing plenty of cards. You could play Muldrifter if you really want to. So when you draw all those extra cards, you're going to make somebody mill 2 or make each opponent mill 2. Sphinx's Tutelage can even redo it if you're targeting the right person and they mill the right things. This is a good way to finish. I'm a sucker for mono blue because you play a lot of islands and you can play Flow of Knowledge, which draws for each island you control, and then Flow of Insight, I think, which is basically the same thing, but an instant speed, and you discard a card. That way, when you have these Sphinx's Tutelage, you're like, draw 12, because I have 12 islands, mill 1,000.
I really like these because these are also inclusions in my own deck, and it was really funny because BZ actually died to Sphinx's Tutelage pretty recently.
I was bullied. I was bullied right out of that game, and it was king making. What's the next card?
The next card is Ghostly Flicker. You're going to want to be flickering your creatures to get those value to mill other people. So, of course, you are going to put Ghostly Flicker in there and flicker the 2 creatures that mill the most at the moment.
And one of my favorite cards to pair with Ghostly Flicker is Archaeomancer. Since Ghostly Flicker, and there's some cards like it, like Displace, flickers 2 creatures at a time, one of them can be Archaeomancer, and the other one can just be a nice ETB that you want. Let's say Sphinx Mindbreaker. So then we pay 3, we flicker Archaeomancer and the Sphinx, we mill everybody for 10, advance our game plan, then use Archaeomancer to just get back Ghostly Flicker when Archaeomancer enters. Now, for every 3 mana we have, we can just keep doing that.
I think this is a way more fun way to build a blink deck than like a very standard one with Thassa that you'd usually see.
Yeah, what's more fun? Flickering Sphinx Mindbreaker and Jace's Mindseeker along with an Archaeomancer, or using Ghostly Flicker to exile Peregrine Drake and Archaeomancer, where everyone else just falls asleep and you go, guys, I'm presenting lethal, and they go, oh, okay, sure, let's just go to the next game.
It's value, but it's not as much fun to watch.
But if you love these weird decks and you're still looking for like another dose of weird, we made a Commander Precon, but for the year 1999. So if you'd like to check that out and just go, what the heck does a 1999 Precon look like? Well, all your answers are in there. And there's even a Moxfield link. Our tip for the day, however, is that unicorns are not real. Neither are Pegasuses. I'm sorry.